There are moments in life when the years feel heavy, when loneliness lingers like a shadow, and passion seems like something only remembered in dreams. But then, without warning, one gaze changes everything. A look that cuts through silence, a touch that awakens what was thought long buried, a kiss that pulls the soul back to life. This is not just a story of desire. It is a story of rediscovery, of rebirth, of finding out that true love does not fade with time. It only waits for the right moment to return. Here, every word, every breath carries the truth that love is timeless, that passion never truly dies, and that being seen deeply, completely can transform everything. Welcome to a journey where hearts collide, bodies awaken, and love becomes sacred again. Life had a way of making everything smaller, quieter, and somehow emptier over time. It wasn't sudden. It crept in like a fog, settling in the corners of each day until the world felt dim and muted. There were mornings where the mirror reflected nothing more than a shell, eyes dulled by years that passed without notice, skin that carried lines carved by silence more than laughter. Once, there had been color, laughter, fire, and the intoxicating rush of being seen, wanted, cherished. But that time felt buried so far beneath the weight of years that it almost seemed like it belonged to someone else. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into years, and the rhythm of life became predictable, almost mechanical. Conversations with others floated on the surface, never reaching the depths where truth once lived. Smiles were polite, nods automatic, and the silence between each moment was filled with an ache too heavy to name. To walk through life without being noticed, without the warmth of a lingering gaze, was to feel like a ghost among the living. Loneliness didn't shout, it whispered. It lingered in the quiet hours of night when the world slept but the heart remained restless. It clung to the skin in the way the air feels heavy before a storm. The ache of being untouched became more than physical, it was spiritual, emotional. A reminder that time could be cruel in stripping away not only youth but the very sense of being alive. The body remembered what the heart had been starved of, but the world seemed to turn its face away. There were moments when a glance in the crowd could sting like a blade. People looked past, around, through as if nothing stood there. Invisible, even in a room full of voices. The worst part wasn't that others didn't see. It was forgetting what it felt like to be worth being seen. Years of routine dulled the edges of desire, locking passion behind doors that seemed rusted shut. Memories of touch, of being kissed as if every breath depended on it, became fragments of a story long closed, and yet, beneath the quiet, something still lived, a faint pulse, stubborn and steady, whispering that life was not yet done. It was hidden, buried under layers of time, but it never fully died. Even in loneliness, there was a restless spark waiting for a reason to rise. Nights were the hardest, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, reaching into the emptiness where once there had been warmth. Fingers would brush against cold sheets, and the silence pressed in like a weight on the chest. It wasn't simply the absence of another body. It was the absence of being felt, known, desired in a way that made every cell come alive. The world often told a cruel story about age, about fading beauty, about a woman's worth shrinking with time. Those words became walls, reinforcing the invisibility until it felt permanent. To exist beyond the edges of longing was to feel erased. And still, deep inside, the heart ached with memories of how it once felt when a single look could set fire to the skin, when love was reckless and consuming, when desire wasn't restrained but celebrated. There were moments of pretending laughter at gatherings, polite conversation, the mask of being fine, but the truth lay in the quiet after, when the door closed and the mask slipped. That was when the hollow inside revealed itself most. That was when the truth of invisibility pressed hardest, when the silence was unbearable, when tears sometimes fell without reason, only because the weight could no longer stay hidden. And yet, even in the silence, even in the aching, there was a longing that refused to die. A longing not only for touch but for recognition, for connection that pierced deeper than the surface, to be seen again, not for what time had taken, but for what still burned beneath, to have eyes linger not in judgment, but in awe, in hunger, in reverence, to feel again what it was to be chosen, desired, and claimed in a way that erased the years of being unseen. Invisible did not mean dead. Invisible did not mean empty. Invisible was only a veil, waiting for the right moment, the right spark to be torn away. And deep inside, there was a hope fragile but unyielding that one day someone's eyes would break through the fog, that one steady gaze would strip away the shadows, and everything forgotten would rise again. Because beneath the silence, the body remembered, the heart remembered, the soul remembered, and it was only a matter of time before memory turned back into life. It happened in the quietest way, when there was no expectation, no preparation, no defense left to hold. A room full of faces, voices, movement, and yet, for the first time in years, everything slowed to a stillness that wrapped itself around me. His eyes found mine across the noise, and in that instant the world shifted. It wasn't a fleeting glance or the polite acknowledgement people give when they cross paths. It was something else, something deeper, a gaze that did not waver, that did not rush, that seemed to reach into places I had long buried. For so long I had walked as if unseen, carrying the weight of invisibility like a silent burden. But that moment broke it apart. His eyes lingered not out of pity, not with curiosity, but with something unshakable, as though there was nothing forgotten, nothing lost. It was the kind of look that stripped away years of silence, as if the shadows had only been waiting for someone to tear them down. There was no language spoken between us at first, but the silence said everything. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat, because I couldn't remember the last time anyone had looked at me like that, not just looked, but seen. It felt as if he could read every ache I had carried, every longing I had silenced, every part of myself that had been left untouched. And yet, instead of judgment, there was reverence. Instead of distance, there was desire, raw and honest, unhidden by hesitation. The way his eyes traveled slowly, deliberately, across my face, as though memorizing every line, made the air feel charged. I could feel my body awaken beneath that gaze, the way blood rushes after being numb for too long. My skin tingled, not from touch, but from the intensity of being studied with such hunger. There was no shame in it, no attempt to disguise it. His desire was steady, unshaken, and it drew me in like a tide I had no will to resist. I wanted to turn away, to hide from the vulnerability that rose within me, but I couldn't. Something held me, tethered me to that moment. It was as if years of silence had been peeled back, and the woman I thought had vanished suddenly remembered herself. In his gaze, I was not invisible, I was not forgotten. I was alive, burning, waiting to be claimed. Time lost its shape as he moved closer, slow, deliberate, as if each step was carved with purpose. When he stood near enough for his presence to wrap around me, the air between us crackled. I felt the warmth of his breath, subtle, intoxicating, pulling me deeper into a space I hadn't allowed myself to enter in years. When his hand brushed against mine, whether by accident or intention, the world inside me shattered and rebuilt all at once. The smallest contact, and yet it set fire to a body starved for touch. My heart raced, my skin lit up, and the silence between us swelled with unspoken truths. I looked up, and his eyes locked mine again, unwavering, daring me to let go of everything I thought I had lost. The sound of voices around us faded, the movement of others blurred, but his eyes never left me. There was no need for words, because everything I had hidden for so long was being pulled to the surface by that steady recognition. He didn't look at me like I was a shadow. He didn't look at me like someone defined by years. He looked at me as though nothing had ever been taken, as though every part of me still burned, still mattered, still had power. Desire isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the stillness, in the gaze that lingers just a second too long, in the breath that catches when closeness becomes too much to ignore. That night, with his eyes on me, desire returned not as a memory but as a living force, reminding me of the hunger I had silenced, the passion I had locked away, the truth that had never died even beneath years of loneliness. It wasn't about the touch of his hand or the warmth of his body close to mine, not yet. It was about the recognition, to be seen so deeply, so thoroughly, stripped away everything I thought I had become. His gaze told me I was not invisible, I was not forgotten, I was not done. His gaze told me I was still a woman, worthy of hunger, worthy of reverence, worthy of love. And in that moment, with his eyes steady on mine, I knew my life would never again return to the silence it once carried. It began with something so simple, almost innocent, yet it carried the weight of years pressed into a single moment. The brush of his fingers against mine was enough to unravel the silence that had bound me for so long. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't forced, it was deliberate, charged, alive. My body trembled as if it had been waiting, aching, starving for that very touch, and suddenly every nerve awakened. Every cell remembered what it had once known but had locked away in the cold storage of time. His hand lingered, warm and steady, and the air between us thickened, charged with something I hadn't felt in years. My breath quickened, not from fear, but from the flood of longing that rose like fire beneath my skin. That fire had never truly died. It had only been buried, silenced by routine, dulled by loneliness. But in his touch it came rushing back, fierce and unstoppable. When his lips met mine, the world collapsed into a single heartbeat. Soft at first, almost cautious, then hungrier, deeper, as if he, too, had been holding back something too powerful to contain. That kiss was not just lips meeting. It was years of hunger breaking free, years of silence shattering into soundless confession. My body arched into him instinctively, as if memory had awoken before thought could catch up. The taste of his mouth, the press of his hands, the heat of his breath against my neck, every detail was burned into me. It was more than desire. It was resurrection. The body remembered the language of longing, and in his touch, in his kiss, I spoke it again without hesitation. My hands traced the lines of his body, desperate, searching, relearning the intimacy I thought had been lost forever. His skin was fire beneath my palms, his heartbeat thunder against my chest, and the closeness pulled me into a world where time ceased to matter. Every kiss deepened the truth that had been waiting in silence. Every touch broke another chain that had kept me numb. The way his fingers trailed across my skin sent shivers through me, awakening places I thought had gone cold, places I believed would never feel alive again. His touch was not rushed. It was reverent, as though he was rediscovering me piece by piece, as though nothing could be taken for granted, and I let go. I let go of the years of restraint, of the lies I had told myself that passion was behind me. I let go of the fear of being seen, the shame of longing, the weight of invisibility. In his arms, in the heat of his mouth against mine, I was free. Free to feel, free to want, free to surrender to a hunger that was not just physical but spiritual, a hunger that went beyond flesh into the very core of my being. Our breaths mingled, ragged and unsteady, as his hands pulled me closer, anchoring me against him. Each movement was a declaration, each caress a confession, each kiss a vow spoken without words. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the undeniable truth that our bodies had recognized one another long before our minds dared to admit it. Desire is not always gentle. Sometimes it is fierce, consuming, overwhelming in its urgency, and in that moment I welcomed it. I welcomed the rush of heat, the trembling surrender, the wild pulse that beat between us. His lips against my throat, his hands in my hair, his body pressed into mine, every sensation was a reminder that I was not invisible, not forgotten, not done. I was alive. The room around us blurred into nothing, silence giving way to the sound of breath, of skin against skin, of hearts colliding after years of emptiness. It was not just the return of desire, it was the rebirth of identity, the return of truth. My body, my heart, my soul, they had been waiting for this, aching for this, and in his touch they found release. Every kiss, every touch, every breath between us carried a weight far beyond passion. It was longing transformed into presence, absence turned into flame. It was not just about flesh, though flesh burned and demanded. It was about being claimed, being wanted, being chosen in a way that erased every moment of being unseen. Time had stolen much, but in that night, in his arms, time returned what it had taken. Desire was no longer memory. It was alive, fierce, undeniable. And as his hands traced my skin, as his lips spoke a language only my body could answer, I understood that what had been silenced could never truly be killed. The body remembers, the heart remembers. And when the right touch comes, when the right lips find yours, when the right gaze burns steady into your soul, everything lost comes rushing back as though it had been waiting all along. And in that awakening, I was no longer bound by years or silence. I was fire. What began as hunger quickly became something far greater, something I hadn't known I was still capable of feeling. At first it was the fire, the rush of heat, the urgency of touch that swept me back into myself. But as the days passed, it became more than that. His presence filled the silence in ways I hadn't imagined possible. It was not just desire that tied me to him, but something deeper, something unshakable, something that grew in the space between our hearts each time our eyes met, each time our hands found one another. There was a tenderness in the way he touched me, even when passion burned fierce. Every kiss, no matter how hungry, carried a softness that told me I was more than just a body, more than just a momentary flame. He held me as though I was something sacred, as though every inch of me carried meaning, and in his arms, the years that had weighed me down seemed to dissolve. He did not see lines or scars or the traces of time. He saw me, whole and unbroken, and in his gaze I was reborn. Love did not come loudly. It crept in quietly, unfolding in the small things, the way he listened without rushing, the way his laughter felt like sunlight spilling into a darkened room, the way his eyes lingered when I spoke, as though every word mattered. What had begun as fire was now a river, steady and endless, flowing through every part of me. It wasn't only about nights of passion, but about mornings filled with warmth, afternoons of shared silence, the gentle weaving of two lives into one rhythm. With him, every moment was rediscovery. I rediscovered how it felt to be cherished, how it felt to be wanted not for what I once was, but for what I still am. I rediscovered the power of vulnerability, of opening myself completely without fear of rejection. I rediscovered the beauty of love that does not measure by years or rules, but by the depth of connection that exists between two souls who have found one another against all odds. He reminded me that tenderness and passion are not separate, but two halves of the same truth. His hands could ignite fire, and yet the same hands could hold me with such gentleness that tears would rise unbidden. His lips could demand, but they could also soothe, whispering promises not with words, but with the certainty of devotion pressed against my skin. It was in those contrasts, the hunger and the softness, the urgency and the patience, that I understood love had returned not as a shadow of what it once was, but as something even deeper, fuller, and more sacred. Age became meaningless in his embrace. Time had no power over what grew between us. The world might have its rules, its expectations, its judgments, but none of that touched the truth we lived in those moments. Love is not bound by numbers or dictated by clocks. Love is an awakening, a rebirth, a collision of souls that recognize each other beyond the limits of what the world sees. And that was what I found: recognition, belonging, home. There were nights when passion consumed us, when bodies spoke in the language of longing, when desire carried us into places beyond words. But even then, beneath the fire, there was a depth that could not be denied. Every touch said, "I see you." Every kiss said, "You are mine." Every breath shared between us was a vow that went deeper than any promise spoken aloud. It was as though life had stripped me bare only to prepare me for this truth, this love that cared for nothing but the collision of two hearts beating in unison. And in the quiet after, when the fire had burned and the room was still, he would hold me close as if letting go were unthinkable. Those moments were sacred, the silence heavy with meaning, the warmth of his chest against my cheek, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchoring me in a world that had once felt so empty. In that stillness, I realized love is not only in the passion, but in the staying, in the holding, in the unwavering presence of someone who refuses to let you fade back into invisibility. It felt like rebirth. Not the return of youth, not the erasing of years, but the rediscovery of something timeless, something that had always been waiting. Passion and tenderness do not die. They only sleep, waiting for the one who can awaken them. And when they are awakened by true love, they rise stronger, fiercer, more beautiful than before. What began as hunger became sacred. What began as touch became devotion. What began as longing became truth. And in that truth, I found not only him, but myself again, because when two souls finally collide, there is no age, no rule, no boundary strong enough to stand in the way. There is only love. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love, desire, and connection live far beyond age or silence, then stay with us. More stories of passion, rebirth, and timeless devotion await. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because true love deserves to be remembered, and every soul deserves to feel it again.